Welcome to the fastest daf in town. Today we'll Masechtas Kiddushin daf Ayin Gimel. We're going to begin on Ayin Beis Amud Beis. 3 lines from the bottom. Tanur bottom. Ger Noisi Mamzeres Dibri Rabbi Yosi. So we actually began this a little bit in yesterday's daf, but according to Rabbi Yosi, he says that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres, and the reason Rashi says is because he holds kahal gerim lo ikri kahal. Therefore, because he's not considered to be part of kahal, so therefore he's allowed to marry a mamzeres. And Rashi further says, Vlad mamzer. And when they have a child, that child will be a mamzer, which is going after the psul. Rabbi Yehuda Eimer ger lo yis mamzeres. Rabbi Yehuda says that ger is not allowed to marry mamzeres because he disagrees. And he holds that kahal gerim is ikri kahal. And therefore, because of that, they're not allowed to marry mamzeres, who is not part of the kahal. Echad ger, echad eben meshucher, whether we're dealing with a convert or a freed slave, v'chol, or the product of a kohen with a gerusha, mutarim b'kohenes. The din is, they are allowed to marry a kohenes woman. Says Rashi, V'yafal pisha kohan masurim b'giores, a kohen is not allowed to marry a giores, u'mishuchereres, v'chalola. A kohen is not allowed to marry any of these women. Savar u'chuzur kohanois ksheros linasu psulim. The other way around, we're more lenient when it comes to women, and we allow them to be able to marry these psulim. These 3 individuals, a kohenes is allowed to marry. So my time to Rabbi Yosi. Why does Rabbi Yosi hold a ger can marry a mamzeres? So chamisha kahal iksivi. It says the word kahal 5 different times. Rashi quotes the psukim. And he says when it says kahal by Petzua Daka, that doesn't count because that category is not part of yuchsin. So therefore there's actually only 5. Chamisha kahal iksivi. As we continue to Ayin Gimel B'Aleph, Aleph, Chad, one of them is to teach us is l'kohanim. Says Rashi, Medahavi motzil michtavinhu l'kuhu b'chad azhara. Since all of them could have been included in one warning, v'chad kahal or yavo mamzer v'almoini moavi b'kal. So it could have all been said together. Gamdor siro yavo lehem b'kal ad oila b'kam mitzvah daimidor shlishi yavo lehem lechem. So the first 2 generations you cannot marry a mitzri. The 3rd generation you may. So one again is referring to Kohanim. V'chad l'Leviim. And the other one is talking about the Leviim. V'chad l'Yisraelim. V'chad l'Mishri mamzer b'shtuki. The 4th kahal allows a mamzer to marry a shtuki, which we said is a situation where we don't know the status of who the father is. Says Rashi, Afal pi shezev vadai v'zesavik. Even though one is vadai, apostle, a mamzer, and a shtuki we just don't know. And says Rashi, shemazek kasher v'aser uisa mamzeres. We're not going to have the assumption that the shtuki really is a kosher. Dahaki darshin and b'kal vadai hudol yavo mamzer. Habakal safik kagan shtuki yavoi. So the drushes we're going to see soon is that the pasuk says you can lo yavo mamzer. Mashma, if it's someone who's a suffix mamzer, namely a shtuki, so we're more lenient. And therefore also v'chad l'mishri shtuki b'Yisrael. So it's interesting, a shtuki goes both ways. And again, the drasha is mamzer vadehu lo yavu b'kahal. Or mamzer suffix yavoy. So since a shtuki is a mamzer suffix, so he's allowed to marry the kahal Hashem. And also only someone who is a vadei Yisrael, a vadei kosher, cannot marry a mamzer. However, someone who is a suffix could marry a mamzer. So it's interesting, again, we find a shtuki actually has the best of both worlds, if you will. It says Rashi, V'tanimas nisin shtuki posel, but our Mishnah does say shtuki's posel, humid rabbanon. Kidol Kaman Shema Yisa Chayisa Miyaviv. So there's going to be a gezerah, which we'll see soon, about him, because he doesn't know who his father is. He marrying his father's sister, because he doesn't know who his father is. But Me'ikar Hadin Midaraisa, a shtuki can marry into Yisrael. Kahal Gerim Likri Kahal. He says that Kahal Gerim is not called Kahal. Says Rashi, Delo Ayater one Kral Kahal Gerim. There's no extra pasuk to teach anything about a ger. And therefore, since there's no extra word Kahal, we're not going to include a ger in Kahal. Rabbi Yehuda, Kohanim Leviim B'chad Kahal Naf. You know, the truth is, Kohanim and Leviim, you go out from the same pasuk. As Rashi says, the Shevet Echad Heim. Vein Likros Kahal Chatzi Shevet. A Kahal has to be a Shevet. And we know Kohanim Leviim, you can be a Kohen or a Levi, but you still come from Shevet Levi either way. So, a Yater Lake Kahal Gerim. So therefore there's an extra pasuk to come to teach you about Kahal Gerim, that they're called Kahal. V'iboy Sema, if you want, you could say Hachinami Trei Kahalininu. Really, there's two. Mamzer b'shtuki shtukim Yisrael b'chad Kahal Nafka. Really, Kohen and Levi may have to split. However, the din of a shtuki can be learned out from one Kahal. Lo yabu mamzer b'kahal Hashem. So what do we learn out from there? Mamzer vadehu di yavoy. Only a mamzer vade cannot marry a regular kosher Yisrael. A mamzer safek yavoy b'kahal yavoy. However, he could, if he's a shtuki, he could marry into a Yisrael. For that matter, b'kal vadehu lo yavoy or b'kal safek yavoy. He's allowed to marry also a mamzer. Even though he's a suffix, it's not a problem. This is also, we have to split this for a shtuki. So then, how does Rabbi Yehuda know kahal ger mikri kahal? The time Rabbi Yehuda mehacha, he learns out from another source. Hakahal. Here we say again, it says hakahal chuka achas olchem v'lager hagar. And it says for the ger. So look in Rashi. V'ibois ema haninami trei kahalininu v'ilu lo ayater kra lo yehavi darshin and mamzer vadehu lo yavoy hasaving mamzer yavoy. Maybe we would not have learned that other drasha. El havi amrinan kikol shar sveki iser. Al vade as haras vade lukoi salav as haras safek isura. That maybe we're not going to be lenient when it comes to a suffix. So that's why you really may need a second pasuk. So the question is, why does it say kahal over there in Sefer Bamidbar? It's coming to tell you that it's that kahal gerim is ikri kahal. Rav Yosi chuka achas hifsek inyan. Since it says chuka achas in between the words kahal and ger hagar, that separates it, and therefore you can't learn out anything from there. Okay, let's look at question 3. Chamisha kahalik sivi, gabi as horas psuli yuchsin. Well, my isra chamisha. Why do you need 5? Okay, so one is for a kohen, one's for a Levi, one's for Yisrael. One is to mater or mamzer to a shtuki, one is to mater shtuki to Yisrael. Rameir kohanim leviim o mamzer b'shtukim shtukim Yisrael b'chad kron nafki vitar and chadas al kahal ger. Okay. Then the Gemara says like this: Echad ger echad eved mishochar v'chol mutan b'kohenas. We say that kohenas is allowed to marry all these various apostle men. Misayle Rab, the Amar Rabbi Yehuda Rab supports Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Rab. That we never said there was an issue even of a kosher woman that she cannot marry an apostle. We allow her to be able to marry an apostle. It's not an issue. Okay. All right. So let's continue. Darsh of Zera. So he makes the following drasha. Ger mutter b'mamzeres. He says that a ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres, which is what we said before. Now, what does that mean? It sounds nice, but what it really means is that kahal gerim is lo ikri kahal. So ragmuhu kol yalma be'esro gaihu. Apparently, it was Sukkah's time. apparently people enjoy throwing their sroigim, so they started throwing a sroigim at him. Why? It says Rashi, Shahayu Sham Gerim Harbe. This is a hard pill to swallow, to hear that you're not considered to be Kahal Hashem, because a lot of those people were converts. Omarava, mi ika didarish milsa ki hai beduchta deshchiche gire. Is there a person that understands how to darshan in a place where there's a lot of gerim? In other words, maybe it's true that that's the din, but you have to know your audience. You can't start teaching people something in which shows a lack of potential sensitivity. Darish Rabbi Mechuza. So that was Reb Zera. Now Rava in the same location, where again there was a lot of converts, he said Gerim Mutter Kohenes. To anuhu b'shiroi. They covered him up with silks because they were happy. That means Kahal Gerim Ikri Kahal. Hadarshahu Gerim Mutter b'mamzeres. Then he said a ger is also allowed. A ger is allowed to marry a mamzeres. First, he said a ger could marry a kohenes. He said he can also marry a mamzeres. So this confused them because obviously this is a problem. So Amrulay of Sidatal Kamaisa, we liked you for a second, and all of a sudden you're causing yourself problems. Why would you say this about us? That now a ger can marry mamzeres? Amrulay goes, you understand? I did something good. You can marry whomever you want. You can marry a kohenes, and you can marry a kohenes. You can marry a mamzeres. The truth is, it's true. He can marry either because even if this ger is apostle, it's not a problem for a kohenes to marry such a person. And what the mamzeres Rabbi Yosi, because the Taka holds like the sheet of Rabbi Yosi, which is interesting, very amazing vart. They basically both said the same thing, that a ger is mutter b'mamzeres because kahal gerim lo ikri kahal. But it's not that he originally Rab Zera shouldn't say the truth, but you have to know how to package the truth. It's very interesting. So he could have first said the first din that you're allowed to marry kohenes. Now they may not understand the reason behind that. It's because that we don't care if apostle marries a kohenes, but all they would hear is something positive. And then you could now say something else which they'll be more willing to accept, even though it's the exact same thing. So it's amazing how you can have two people saying the same thing, but the way it's framed can make all the difference. Elhin shtuki kol shemaker. Omarava. Devar Torah shtuki kosher. The din is mina Torah. The shtuki is kosher. So my time a Rav Ksher Metzla. The majority of people, at least in those days, were kosher. Umiyat psun. It was a small minority of people that were apostle. So therefore, we should go boss a Rav. And Rav, this kid's probably a kosher. V'azi inhu gaba kol the parish meruba parish. So if he's coming to us, so he's separated. So the din that who separates from the majority. We see this called many places, including Masechtas Brachos, famous story in Tfilas HaShachar. So my Yamar Dilma as ihi wagabayhu. What if she comes to him? So then we say the din it's 50-50. So therefore we apply this pasuk that doesn't make any difference. It's almost like, why do you have to say the drush of kol the parish meruba parish? We just use the pasuk, okay. But regardless, the point is that either way, the shtuki is allowed to marry a kohenes. He's allowed to marry a mamzer. So matam amar shtuki posel. So why do you say he can't? He can't marry into Kal Hashem. We're concerned because he doesn't know who his father is, that maybe this woman who he's married is his father's sister, which obviously he's also to marry. You're not to marry your aunt. Omiyata shtukit loyisa. A shtuki should not even marry a shtukit. Shemi yisa chayis miyaviv, for the same issue. No, this guy shouldn't be able to marry anyone, because it's always a question who he's marrying. Gemara says no. Kol ki hani maznu ve'azli. You think the whole world is being mazana over here? How's it shaykh to assume that this person was with this person? So we should say also the daughter of a shtukas you should marry, because maybe you're marrying again your father's sister. We should say no, it's not shchiach. So therefore, this is also not shchiach. Why would we say that a shtuki should marry because of this gezerah? It's not shchiach. Why should we institute something which is not common? Says Rashi, the likelihood of him having married his sister. We know this principle. So then why would we be geyser here? You're right. Technically, he should be allowed to, and we technically should make a gezerah el mal also b'yochsan, as we find this in many places, that sometimes when it comes to yochsan, we take upon ourselves additional stringencies. And therefore, that's the reason why shtuki cannot marry, is because it's a mal also b'yochsan. The Yomi Rabbi Devar Torah is Sufi kosher. The truth is, in a Sufi, who's an abandoned child, we don't know if it's who the parents are at all, we don't even know who the mother is, he's also kosher. So my time, Eishasish Bibala Toila. Usually when we're dealing with a married woman, we should assume that she was probably she probably ended up having a child from her husband, most likely, says Rashi. Rashi says something amazing. If in fact this child was a mamzer, she would not have abandoned this child. Unbelievable, Rashi. Because she could say, this is my husband's. So she would have kept her kid and say it's her husband and not have abandoned the child. So it's very interesting. A woman knows that there's obviously a fundamental difference for a man, that he's not going to want to be with a woman if this child is not his. First of all, obviously it shows that she's also to him for Eishes Ish, but also she'll abandon the child because she's going to, let's say, somehow her husband was away for at war, let's say, or whatever it was, for a year, and the husband has no idea what happened. She's not going to want to keep this child. So that is the type of child who will be abandoned. However, the reality is, we assume most of them are bebala toila, maika miat arusais. So there's some situations of an arusa, umiut shaholach baleim medinas yam, and there's some in which the husbands went to medinas yam. So kivan diika panuya v'ikanami. These are all other potential situations where the child is a mamzer. So this child was probably not a mamzer. Just forgetting about that Rashi for a second. Just push it that you would think that this child was probably not a product of Eishes Ish, because the likelihood is, even if she was Mazana, who we don't know who this mother is anyway, but the likelihood is this is actually from a intact marriage of some sort, maybe. Now there is a chance that this is an arusa, in which obviously it's a mamzer, and it's also a chance that from Eishes Ish, or the husband went to Medina Siyam, is also a problem. The kivan de ika panuya. So on the other hand, it could be a child from a panuya, a non-married woman who has a child. That child is not apostle. The ikanami de machmas ravoin havi. It's possible that the reason why the child was abandoned is because of a famine. In other words, there's really nothing wrong with this family. It's just that they had no ability to pay for this child, so they had to give up this child. So habi palgu batar amu yavo mamzer bekal Hashem mamzer vadihudu yavoi hamamzer safik yavo bekal vadihudu yavo habekal safik yavo. So we apply the same drasha as by a shtuki. This is a suffix by a sufi. So therefore, because we don't really know the status of this child, there is a very good chance that this child is a kosher, but there is a chance that it's not. So in the case of a suffix, so we say that a Nasufi is allowed to marry into Kahal Hashem and also marry Mamzer. However, Matam Amr Asufi Apostle, why do we say that he's not allowed to? So he says maybe he may end up marrying again from his father, his sister. So he asked the same kasha by the shtuki here. Sufis or Yisa, even a Sufi should marry a Sufis for the same concern, because we don't know who the parents are, and therefore we could always assume maybe this person is actually his father's sister, right? So it's the same kasha. A Sufis or Yisa, Shemi Yisa Chaysa ben Mi'ava ben Mi'imoy. So Kol Hani Shadeh V'Azli. So are we really going to throw all this into the same basket, if you will? That Basa Sufi Yisa Shemi Yisa Chaysa, that then you can't even marry her daughter. We're not concerned about that because it's not common. So it's a kasha. Why would we aser the Sufi? Oh, mal also b'yuchsin. Again, when it comes to yuchsin, it's interesting over there it was mal also b'yuchsin. Here it's mal also b'yuchsim. I'm not sure exactly the difference in the girsa. Okay. Amar Rava bar Rav Huna. Matzu moyol. So now we're going to learn a little bit more about this a Sufi, what the din is when it comes to this particular child. So if you find that this child was abandoned, but he had a bris milah, so it means that obviously there's something about this family, about this child that probably is okay. So Ein Gimel Medbeis Ein Bo Mishum a Sufi. That child is not a Sufi. Says Rashi, the Ilav the Kasherhu will have Tarchabe Mahile. If it was a really apostle, they may not have even have circumcised the child, which is hard to understand because apostle is also mechuyev in mitzvos. All right, something to think about. Mishalte hadmei ein bo mishum asufi. If his limbs were straightened out, which is one of the things that they did for a tinuk, that's again a sign that this is not an asufi. Because again, if this child is apostle, they wouldn't have gone through all of this process of having done so. Ayin Rashi. Shayef Mishcha Mali Kuchla Rami Chumre, all these different things. If you put the oils or some type of makeup around their eyes to beautify the baby, which interesting they used to do that apparently. If they're Rami Chumre, that they had these Rashi says ksharim, these knots, sha'osim refuah, the toyim latinuk, they used to hang knots for their children. As the Gemara in Shabbos says, Habanim yoitzim b'ksharim, and the question is maybe it's like a shoelace from the father because they have an emotional attachment. Obviously, it shows that there's a connection to the parent. Tali piska, if let's say there's an amulet that's being hung, and that's a kameh shel ksav, which has written scripture in it. Vitali kameya, or that of herbs, of ikarin, Rashi says, ein bo mishum asufi. Again, all these things are a sign that the parents are watching over this child, says Rashi, the chasal chayev. They're concerned over his life. And we can see from their beginning, shoahavto, that they love this child very much. Their intention was not just to leave him to die, you want him to live. So that's the idea. Tali bedikle, if let's say he's by a date palm tree, so imatale chay, if a wild animal can get to him, yeshu mishum asufi. Imlav in mishum asufi. So it depends if he's protected from wild animals, then we know he's not a sufi. Zeradta smicha lamasa, says Rashi. So if you're Rashi says itali be'ilan shishmo zeradta. If you hang him by a tree, which that's its name, says Rashi, afagav doloi matali chaya. Even if a wild animal cannot reach him, yeshua mishum asufi. As it says in Masechtas Arvei Pesachim, zeradta desmichel mata, close to a city, lo pchisa mishtin shede. So there was demons, shedim, in that area, and therefore, even if wild animals can't reach them, yeshma mishum asufi, because the shedim can. The imlav in bo mishum asufi. So he says, but if not, if it's not this particular tree, or it's not near the city, In other words, where there's shadim are not frequented, then it's not in the Sufi. Be'kanista smichta l'masa. If the child is found in a Beis Achneses, which is typically found outside of a city, which outside the city, again, we're concerned of mazikim. Again, if you wish, you can call them demons. Smichta l'masa shrichi barab. There's a lot of people there. Ema mishum asufi. Right? Because there's there's not going to be any mazikim, and there's going to be someone who's going to find the child. The imam yesh mishum asufi. Amar Meimer, Hai Pera de Souffle. When it comes to these date pits, Rashi says, Garine Tamarim, L'Maichel Behemo, so Shchiach B'Humazikin, this area where they put these date pits, where again there's Mazik in there, Yeshba Mishum Asufi. So we're concerned that this child is going to be harmed. Charifta de Nahara. If let's say he's by this river, Einbo Mishum Asufi, says Rashi, why? He was thrown into the middle of the river. But he's like in a boat, a little boat. But there's a lot of ships that pass by. Tamid in Mishumasuvi, the Lakach Tarchel Lichai ad Charifos Hanahar, Shiyaris Svino Sham Biamsu. Why did you deliberately put the baby in that location where there's constant people there, constantly boats? Is because you knew that there was a very, very high chance that someone was going to find the baby. So therefore, this is not going to be in the Sufi. Fine. That's Charif de Nahar and Mishum Sufi. Pishrei Yeshbo Mishum Sufi. However, if instead it's on the edge, Rashi's Makam Shipua Hanar. So in that situation where there's no boats that go in that area, then that child's a Sufi. Sidi Rishus Arabim. If you're on the side of the public thoroughfare, Ein Bo Mishum Sufi, because people are going to collect the child. Rishus Arabim Yesh Mishum Sufi. And Rishus Arabim, like in the middle of a I-95, you can understand that you're wishing to harm the child. Amarava Vishnei Ravan. However, in the time of famine, Ein Bo Mishum Sufi. Now, what is that referring to? So in this, Rashi, the Gemara says, Hadarava Aheya. What is he talking about? So it was just because it's the time of a hunger, you're going to have your child put in harm's way like that. Obviously, even the time of hunger, if the child is put in the Rishus Harabim, the din is that child is a Sufi. The El Atzidi Rishus Harabim, says Rashi. Shahar bin Shlachim lo ratzu chachamim lo paisel machmas yitzias koil. So when it comes to a Sidi Rishus Harabim, we're making a distinction between Mishas Rabbain. So we said normally Ema Mishum Asufi, and he says, well, it depends if it's the time of a Rabbain, of a famine. So Me'ir Shnei Rabbain, I feel below Shnei Rabbain. What's the difference? It shouldn't make any difference, even if it's not Shnei Rabbain. You put the child in the Sidi Rishus Harabim on the side, so people will find them, and it's not going to be dangerous. Now, Kiyat Madarav, aha. Rabbi Yehuda Marav, Rabbi Abba, Rabbi Yehuda Bar Zavdi, Marav, Kolzman Shabashuk. As long as the child is still in the marketplace, Abba V'imo Ne'emanim Olav. The father and the mother are believed to be able to testify regarding the status of this child. Nesav Minashuk. Once the child is gathered up from the marketplace, and Ne'emanim Olav, the parents are no longer believed. My time on Marava, Hobi Yotza Olav Shema Sufi, because now the name of an Asufi is upon this child, so no longer are you able to remove that. You don't have the Ne'emanis anymore. Yom Rav, and on this is what Rava meant. It was Shnei Ravoin in the time of famine, Apple Pisha Nesam and a Shuk. Even though he's gotten from the marketplace of even Ne'emanim Olav. So we will give the parent Ne'emanis even after the child is gathered. And we're going to do this again, B'shas Rabbain. We're going to be more lenient. Says Rashi, now we'll read this Rashi. Shaharbi Nishlachim, many people who cast their child, Lo Rotzo Chachamim Lo Poislam, they don't want to pass them Machmasiyas Koil. Okay. Rav Chisna, Shloisha Ne'emanim Altar. There are three individuals who are believed immediately. There are three people who are believed immediately. So this is going to be question TA12. TA11. Mi hema shloisha shene'emanim Shloishinem 10. Shloishinem manim altar. Mihem a shloishel edin ma nemanim. So this is Ein Gimel Mid Beis. So we're going to see now on TA 10 who these people are. Okay. So there's three people that are believed immediately. Elohin, a Sufi, Chaya upoteres chavru saha. So a Sufi had Amran. What he mentioned regarding the parents, they're believed only immediately while the child's in the shuk. Chaya, what is this referring to? The Sanya. Chaya ne'manis leimer zeh yatzer rishon v'zeh yatzer sheni. When it comes to a midwife, we say that she's believed to say which child came out first, and therefore that child has the din of a bechor, because she was there. V'zeh yatzer sheni. B'medem u'mamurim. When do we say that she has this ne'manis shul yatza v'chazra? If she didn't leave the room. Of a yatza v'chazra, if she left, eno ne'manis. She doesn't have any more ne'manis after she left the room. She has to have been there the whole time during the childbirth. Rabbi Lezer Omer chuksaka al oimda ne'manis. That if she has a chazaka of being oimdana, of being in one location, then she's believed. The imlav eno ne'manis, which sounds like the same thing, that she didn't leave. So my binayu, ika binayu, da'hader apa. If she just turned her face. So the question is, if she turned the other way, but she was still in the room, in that case, it's a machlokas whether she's still neman. Okay. Poteres chaver sal. And then the third one is the situation of pattering your friend. What is this? Mahi did not. It says the Masechtas Nida. Sholosh nashim shahayu yishena ismamid achas. There are three women sleeping in the same bed. The nimsa dam tachas achas mehen, and you find blood underneath one of the women. So the one of them has a dam nida. So we say besafek kulon tameus. They all are tame. We don't want to take any chance with an einish curse. Badka achas mehen v'nimsas tameya. Let's say one of them is boidik themselves, and they see that she in fact was tameya. So he tameya v'kulon taharais. So therefore she is believed to be able to say that I am the one who's tamei, and therefore my two friends are tahara. Amrav Chisda shebadka atzma kashir vest. However, it has to be kashir vest. Now, what is a sheer vest? Which is not the typical understanding of Hilchas Nida. What is a vest? Here is l'achar metzia miyad. So it means that she checked right away. Where Nida says mefarish sheer vest she'oimid ha'ed hu hakinuach b'tzad hamashkei ve'ein mechusar ela l'kanech miyad. So she was able to basically take her cloth, her bedika cloth, and there was only the time of wiping. In other words, it was an immediate time. There was no delay at all. Okay, so these are people that are neman, again, la'alter. They're believed right away. Okay. Fine. Let's continue. Tanurabanan. Nemenis Chaya Loimer, this woman who is involved in midwifery, is able to say Zekayin v'zeh Levi Zenesin v'zeh Mamzer. She is nemenis to be able to say all these things about these people. But Medibar Amurim Shalokar Shem Arur. That's only if there was no any form of rumor, if you will. Abul Karla Arur, but there was a rumor in Nemenis. So what does that mean? Or demai. What is this rumor? What are people talking about? Elim or chad. Is it that there was one person? We Rabbi Yochanan in Mishnayim. You always have to have two people when it comes to a rumor, or else one person is nothing. Or a tray. We're talking about those two people. The only time we say you have to have two, that's when this person already has a cheskes kashrus. So therefore, to remove the cheskes kashrus, you need two people with an error. However, when there's no cheskes kashrus, then even one is believed. Okay, we're going to stop there. And let's see let's see some questions over here. Question 4. Ad matai nemanois shel av ve'em al sufi. When is a father and a mother believed? As long as they're in the shuk, basically, then they're believed. So either she hasn't left the room or she didn't even turn her face. Vest, which basically means she has to do it altar immediately. It says over here, kashir vest la'achar mitzia. Okay. So let's see. TA 10 we did. TB 11. Asufi shenimsa ha'im nemanim ish v'ish oimer b'neinuhu v'achshiru. So this is what we had already. So this is what I wrote. Kolzman shahatinuk adayin b'shuk. As long as the child is still in the marketplace, heim nemanim. Aval achar hatinuk lo b'shuk. Eino neman. Not the best Hebrew. Ad kan.